All right, IDS Mob. Today's podcast, we are joined by EGE Reynolds. He is a former software engineer turned dating and life coach. And EGE's mission is to help analytical men attract and date women authentically while also using dating as a tool to help his clients become the best versions of themselves. He has a YouTube channel called The Charming Man, and as well as a website. And EGE provides practical tips and insights to help logical guys build real and lasting connections with their dream partners. EGE, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. Good to be here. Excited for the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I've seen some of your YouTube clips and stuff about your website, and so I really want to really focus in on the whole thing about you coaching analytical men, because obviously introverted men are also very, very analytical. But I always start off with my guests asking them, tell me a bit about your dating journey and where you started at, and then how you got to where you're at now.
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. So basically, I grew up in Turkey. I lived in Turkey until I was 18. I came to the US initially for college. And when I was like in high school, I was in the basketball team, but I quit. So I gained some weight during that time. So going into when I was 16, 17 years old, I was overweight, playing video games all the time, and had zero skills to speak to women. Like the only woman I would see were League of Legends characters, which I truly loved, but they didn't reciprocate the love I felt for them, you know?
Yeah.
So I came from this place where in my culture there's a bit of a gap between man and woman, and it's not something you're taught to be able to just speak to women. And I was overweight and I felt insecure. So I was this smart kid who could show up to math physics class, know what to do, and get good grades, but I was very unfulfilled in my personal relationships and my relationships with women. So before going to college, I lost the weight and I came to the US where no one knew who I was. However, my mind still saw me as that fat kid. So although on surface I looked quite similar to how I look now, in my mind, if I looked in the mirror, I would have the beliefs of that person. Oh, this girl's not going to pay attention to me. She's not going to respect me. Why would she even be interested in me? And I used that time in college to really use meeting women as an avenue to challenge my beliefs. So, first, I took care of the social stuff, made some friends, started meeting people, but yet I was still getting friend zoned. And what really pushed me into growing in this arena was there was this girl I really liked who I was friends with. And I remember at some point I got the signal that, hey, she just wants to be friends. But we go on summer break, we come back, and she's like, hey, we should meet when you come back. And I'm like, what? God is handing me a free opportunity. This is amazing. And then we go on 2 dates and I never hear from her again. Things just get awkward. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, something needs to change. So I work with a few mentors along the way. I started approaching women in my college campus, like in libraries, coffee shops, walking around. And that journey really led me to seeing what's possible. Like it's so possible to meet someone spontaneously during the day and then start dating. And as I had those reference experiences, eventually I went, every guy should experience this, should know how it is to be completely free, but most importantly, to be the man that we all want to be and be the ideal version of ourselves. So that got me into the coaching, just seeing how things change in my life and knowing what's possible coming from a kid who was just super overweight, had no social skills, to seeing whoever I want to speak to, I can. And it does lead to amazing experiences.
That's so true. And I feel like, people that are in this space like you, like me, it's like there's always, it goes from like this journey of we couldn't figure anything out whatsoever to then it's suddenly
Right.
like becomes clear as day. But in the mix of that, there's so much that we go through. But one of the big things, obviously, is that I don't know if this is your experience, but I found myself oftentimes like so in my head about every single
Yeah.
move that I needed to make and decide on before I even like said hi to a woman, that it kept me just stuck in paralysis,
Right.
or I moved too late to get the women that I
Mhm.
wanted, you know? So, but what
Yeah.
is it, what do you feel like puts a person in that space where they're just overthinking things all the time?
Yeah, I think for guys who are more analytical, people just get used to having a lot of certainty. Like if you do physics, math, engineering, accounting, you're not going to look at the feelings of an Excel sheet. You're like, here's the formula, I plug in the formula, here's the result. And for people who are used to that world, like I was, I studied computer science. When it came to the social world, there was no certainty. There
Mm,
was no say this, do this, and that's what's going to happen. So I think a big part of what keeps people stuck in that space is social situations are a lot more unpredictable than writing a program or solving for a math equation. And for the guys I work with, that's just what they're used to.
mm,
So the idea of, hey, I'm going to do something, but I don't know how it's going to go is terrifying to them because they want that control of, I need a predictable outcome and I need to know if I say this to the girl, she'll respond somewhat like this, and then it will lead to something, which is interesting, right? Because if you look at YouTube video titles or thumbnails, that's kind of how we like to phrase things on, hey, here's what you do when this happens, because that's what guys want on surface. But from a deeper level, I think the reason people get stuck into their head, just like I was when I was starting, was because I was terrified of uncertainty and not
mm.
knowing, like, oh, I go speak to that girl, but who knows what's going to happen if she's even going to pay attention, or I don't know, right?
Well, yeah, because like it's like the uncertainty is really even more so in they don't know the level of reaction they're going to get. Like if you
Right.
get a math problem wrong, it's either you got it right or you got it wrong, but you can fix that. But like something with humans, it's like if I say this thing, are they going to give a gentle no thank you? Or are they going to laugh me in the face? Are they going to tell all their friends about it? Like it's just we have all these cataclysmic reactions that could happen, probably aren't going
Yeah.
to happen, but our brain doesn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. And like a lot of the time, because of survival instinct, we're more likely to think about the worst case scenario rather than the best case scenario.
Hmm.
Like for someone who's stuck in their head, they're going to think, oh, this girl is just going to tell me to disappear. She's not even going to pay attention. And I've approached thousands of women, and that has happened maybe like 2 or 3 times. It has happened. I'm not going to say it hasn't.
Oh yeah.
But out of all that sample size, it's very rare that happens. And usually when it does, it's truly something about them. You
Yeah.
know, if you're trying to speak to someone with good intentions and they're just very closed off and negative, there's nothing you did wrong there. Your intentions were pure. You were just trying to put yourself out there. And I think a lot of men take responsibility for reactions that are really not their responsibility to fix sometimes,
Mhm.
and take things personally rather than seeing, hey, maybe she's just having a bad day. Maybe she just broke up with her boyfriend. Maybe she's been through some trauma, so she's not very loving towards men. And I think a big part of the work is knowing what's our work to do and what's the other person's work to do and separating
Mm.
that.
Right. Not taking on the burden of everything having to be on us.
Yeah, because I think, men are pushed in that direction many ways. Like, oh, you need to be this rock that woman can come back to, which is very true. It's important to be grounded and provide a layer of not just like financial stability, but emotional stability,
Yeah.
and create an environment where women feel safe around you. But at the same time, I think a lot of men, and myself included at the beginning, we forget that we also have a choice on who we date, because it's so much about how can I make an impression to this person. Whereas when we switch that and understand, hey, I also decide if I want this woman in my life, then the energy we come on with becomes very different.
Mhm. That's so true. Now you've mentioned uh unpredictableness being a factor, but what are some other challenges that analytical men face when it comes to dating?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first challenge any man faces is not speaking to enough women. and getting stuck in their heads when there's opportunity. And most men, I think, will, instead of admitting that, they'll say, oh, there is just no good woman in my city. There are no good
The
women left
entire
around.
city, no girls
Yeah,
whatsoever.
exactly. There are no women left in the world. Unless you live in Antarctica, that's probably not true. And I think what's interesting is when you do get the ability to speak to women, you actually see more women around you just because your mind's open to the possibility. So I think the first part is just initiating the conversation. And then the second biggest problem I see in guys is understanding that conversations are about emotions and energy rather than facts. So a lot of
Mm,
men, they'll speak to a woman and a woman might say, oh yeah, I like playing basketball, or like I like going to yoga. And they'll be like, okay, she said basketball and yoga, okay, I'm going to talk about a time about basketball and yoga, instead of going into, okay, why does this person like that, how does this actually make them feel? Instead of connecting from a feeling level, I think men connect more from or try to connect from a factual level.
yeah.
And then in their mind, they're like, wait, I did everything I had to do. It doesn't compute. What went wrong? And that's when women go like, hey, I didn't feel a spark, or there was no chemistry. And the guy is just going back home thinking, I think that was good, but not hearing back from the girl again.
Yeah, and it was with especially with the communication thing too. I've noticed just in my day to days, like how people tell stories is like you'll say,
Mm,
"Oh yeah, today I had to go to the laundromat and blah 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 blah," and then rather than digging deeper, it's like, "Oh well, I went to the laundromat too," and it's supposed to be like,
yeah,
I think to guys, it's like I'm comparing your story to mine so I can show you how we are similar in a lot of ways, but they're not
right,
being aware that women are reading that as like, but you're not even trying to dive deeper. I need you to dive deeper into knowing who I am. And you're just going on a story
right.
about yourself now. I don't feel connected because you're not trying to really figure out about me.
Exactly. And I think that ties into how being introverted can actually be a superpower, right?
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of men think, and I'm sure you've heard this from people you work with as well,
Mhm.
it's like a lot of introverted men think this is a bad thing. I think it's amazing because you actually build the ability to listen. Like introverted people are a lot more perceptive about what's going on in the conversation. How's everyone feeling? And being really present in that space.
Mhm.
And that's a lot of power because, especially women, just want to be listened to and appreciated. And I think a lot of women are noticed, like they're noticed. You see them, oh, she's dressed well or she's attractive, but they're not fully seen. Not many men really go into their lives and try to understand what makes this woman tick. What is it about her that I like? What are some things about her that are a bit like awkward but kind of cute? And I think if you can be the guy who can really get into that and have her open up, that's how actually women connect with you. So
Mhm.
many times, like I've talked to guys who are introverted who think they need to be amazing storytellers or
Like
crack like,
jokesters.
yeah, like impress her in this like manner where he comes off cocky and extremely extroverted.
Mhm.
And those things are good for us to feel validated, but in terms of a pure attraction level of becoming an attractive man, they're more of the icing on the cake than the cake. Like they're not necessary. It comes down to listening intently and then giving this woman the space to shine and making her feel really understood.
Mhm. And what's also interesting, I find, is that especially with analytical men that have a hard time with women, it's
Mhm.
like they they don't see the correlation between like the stuff that they study, right? They have to study
Mhm.
it enough to where to know how it mechanically works. So they already know that studying something equals being better at it. And
Mhm.
yet, when it comes to women, they're not trying to study the women they're talking to. They're not trying to study like the ins and outs of female attraction, how their minds work, what they need to function in a relationship. In your
Mhm.
practice, do you find yourself having like trying to do your best to point out to logical men or analytical men, hey, if you start to notice these things about women, you'll see that they're actually very easy to connect with?
Hmm. Yeah, actually, I found in your videos that's something you do really well, like really pointing out where, hey, if you notice this, this is what that means, and then breaking things down. I think when I work with people, the way I work with them is a lot more principle oriented,
Mhm.
where I'm like, here are the principles that we're going to work on, and you will see these principles in different situations. And a lot of the time, I'm a proponent of just going into the real world first with the
Hmm.
minimal amount of knowledge so they get some reference experience for themselves. And then I can kind of teach them, okay, here is what that kind of meant. Because I also feel that a lot of men almost learn too much theoretically. And
Mm.
then they start feeling like, oh, yeah, why would I listen to you, man? I already know this stuff. I've read the books, I've studied the YouTube videos. But knowing intellectually is not actually embodying the knowledge that you know. And
Yeah.
all the knowledge is on YouTube. But if you're just watching some videos and taking notes on it, that's not going to benefit you. So when I work with someone, the first thing we do before we even like give them much access to our membership program is go out there and compliment 5 women. Come
Mm.
back and let me know how it goes. So that they feel like, okay, I'm doing this now. My life is actually changing rather than them having to study for a period of time and then feeling like, okay, now I'm ready. Because that can also create a lot of performance anxiety if you know too much.
Right, because then you're trying to go over in your head when you meet a woman. Okay, I gotta like remember this thing, and I gotta touch her in this certain way, and I gotta
Yeah.
say this thing. Yeah, yeah. What's that? I'm curious. What's that experience like for the guys that you take out for that first time? Like they're analytical dudes, and you're taking them out in the field, and you're saying go approach. What is their
Right.
initial reaction to that, and then how are you able to help them progress?
Yeah, so I rarely do in-person coaching these days.
Mhm.
How I work with people is more we have a virtual program, and the first exercise for them is doing those 5 compliments. The way we keep them accountable is they tell me, okay, here's when I'm going out, here's when I'm going to do it, and then we check in with them later on. There are still guys who are in more like intimate one-on-one mentorship that I take out in person, but
Okay.
when it comes to just the complimenting, we focus on this perspective of appreciating beauty, right? Because a lot of the time, men come into this and they're like, okay, I want this to be about me. I want to get that number. I want to go on that date. I want to build that relationship with this woman. And that gives off a very needy energy when they speak to women. It's almost too intense, and women can tell, okay, this guy's telling me all this stuff, but it's really because he wants something from me.
Mm.
So when it comes to that exercise, our perspective is don't even stay in the conversation, man. Like, just really make this about giving, where you go out, you see a girl you want to speak to, you say, hey, excuse me, I know this is a bit unusual, if it's not a bar, but it's just like on the street or a coffee shop, so that you're showing some empathy. And then you just give whatever compliment comes up to your mind. Hey, I thought you looked beautiful. I like your energy. I like how you smile. And then as you give that compliment, you really feel it coming from your heart. So then the energy behind it is from a place of gratitude, is from a place of giving, rather than I'm saying these things so that I can get this outcome from you. So for a lot of guys, that experience is very powerful
Mhm.
because immediately when we start doing the work, they see, okay, this is what happens when I shift my energy, and this is how women actually respond. Like so many guys, I'm sure you've seen this on your comment section or your interactions as well. They will say, oh, no, women react like this. And you go, how many women have you spoken to in the last week? And they're like, no, none.
Yeah.
I
We
spoke one in last year. And that's
we
just not enough.
Yeah, we used to call those keyboard jockeys back in the day, like the
Oh,
guys that
yeah.
like they'd be in the like they go to like forums and talk about, oh yeah, do this next Y and Z, blah blah blah, but they don't have any actual experience. And I think we all start out like that to some extent. Like if we're trying to
Right.
learn stuff, we're like, I think I know this stuff now, and it's like you still got to go out there. Like nothing beats
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a common trap people fall into. When I knew I had to get better, that's why I paid a mentor and just signed up for a program to make me get better, because I knew as an analytical guy, if I didn't have the financial incentive, I would have just kept learning for 2, 3 years. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to be that person who did that without taking action, because I think that's almost worse than not knowing. Because when you study something too long without applying it,
Mhm.
the further that goes on, the more you doubt your ability of like, am I actually going to put this to use one day?
Mm.
And I think that's why it's so important for guys. Let's say they're listening to this episode and it's the first time they've ever seen dating content, actually go out and give those compliments. Because if what you're listening to hasn't changed the way you live your life, then you just wasted your time.
Right. Like you're basically watching content so you feel good about stuff. Like your brain's feeling like,
Exactly.
oh, I get this because I'm listening to it. But yeah, I tell people that watch my show too. I'm like, hey, all this stuff is great, but like at the end of the day, you got to go out there and use it. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Right.
You know?
Exactly, man. That's it.
Yeah. Now, what other kind of exercises do you take guys through in the process of your coaching? Like you don't have to go through all of them, but just like a couple
Mhm.
examples of things you do to kind of help analytical men get out of their way or rethink the way that they're dating.
Yeah. So the first part is again approaching, and we have 4 principles we focus on. It's relaxation, empathy, expression, and leading. So it's expression first, and then empathy and leading. And we look at that as a compass. So the way a compass works is you don't know exactly where you're going,
Mm.
but you know the direction to which you're going to. And these principles are a compass that they can use in any social situation to figure out, okay, what would be a good way to navigate this situation. So the relaxation comes from long form meditations. So we have our students meditate for at least 30 minutes a day for like at least 5 days a week, ideally. Not everyone sticks to it, of course,
Yeah.
but what we find when people meditate is you see how impermanent your thoughts are. One of the biggest reasons men get stuck in dating is we have a thought that arises and we take it to be the truth. And then our complete mood and state just changes by one random thought of
Mm.
like, hey, I'm not good enough, or oh no, this conversation's awkward. It's just one thought. Like you probably have hundreds of thoughts a day, but we pick to take that one personally and go, okay, this means something. Okay, now this conversation's over. So meditation allows people to see whatever thought is arising right now, 5 seconds later, it's not going to be there.
Mm.
So if I have a thought of I'm not enough when I'm speaking to a woman, why hold on to that? Just let go of that and move on, because that just comes and goes. And that's why the meditation practice is a big part of it. And then the second practice that's good is to build their levels of expression. We have them focus on how authentic they actually are.
Mm.
So, a simple journaling practice anyone can do is at the end of the day, you go from 1 to 10, how authentic was I today? And
Mm.
then you ask yourself, how did I censor myself today? And you reflect back into some situations where maybe you wanted to say something, but instead of saying that, you said something different to manage expectations of other people.
Mm.
And then you go, what was I trying to avoid by doing that? What was the pain I was running away from? So that you feel what's motivating you to censor yourself. But the powerful part comes when you go, what did I miss out on
Mm.
by censoring myself? So an example could be, right, if I saw a girl I wanted to speak to at the coffee shop, common situation for guys. How did you censor yourself? Well, you didn't speak to her instead of speaking to her.
Yeah.
And what were you trying to avoid? Potential rejection, maybe people looking at you, maybe feelings of insecurity that could have arisen. And what did you miss out on? Maybe that was your future girlfriend. Maybe you could have gone on an amazing date. maybe she would have had a good conversation with you and recommended you a nice restaurant, a nice coffee shop. Maybe she's in a relationship, but she has a friend and she thinks you're cool, so she can hook you up. So when we have guys shift their attention to what they're missing out on by not being authentic, because a lot of the time we look at like, how am I protecting myself by not saying something? But we're not looking at, wait, what am I missing out on by not approaching that girl? So when that attention shifts, we see that people slowly become more and more authentic in their conversations because they can see how they're screwing themselves over by hiding from the world.
And that definitely happens a lot with guys because I think they fear
Mhm.
being their true selves because there's going to be a rejection of some kind, which, that can stem from childhood. They got, a lot of us get
Yeah.
teased in middle school and high school, and then that still carries over into our adult years as if we're going to still get that kind of reaction from people. But like the idea of dating authentically, like what do you think that means? And then how do you get guys to be more comfortable being that authentic person?
Mhm. I think the idea of dating authentically is sharing your world without trying to impress other people, but also keeping like almost leading with vulnerability, but relaxing into that vulnerability. So I'm not saying go on a first date and talk about your life problems and expect a woman to be a therapist. That's a terrible dating strategy.
Terrible strategy. Yes.
No, definitely don't do that. But what I am saying is get comfortable sharing parts of yourself that you may not conventionally see as attractive. So an example of that is when I was in high school, I had a big crush on Taylor Swift, and she was the girl for me. That's when she played like some country music, and it was a
Yeah.
lot more wholesome compared to what she does these days.
Yeah.
And for a long time, especially being a dating coach, I was like, "Oh, I can't share this with women. It's a bit of a loser period of my life that I don't want to remember." So I disowned that part of me until one day I was like, you know what? Let's just start expressing and see what happens. And what I realized was when I expressed that and I relaxed that tension I felt when I expressed it, because I was like, I don't know how they're going to react to this, it actually made me more in touch with myself. So the way to heal parts of ourselves that we don't feel as comfortable with is almost like sharing that in the right context with the right levels of intimacy, and then feeling the tension and letting that tension know, hey, I love you too. I'm here for you. And the more we do that, the more our energy expands. So because we're loving more and more parts of ourselves, now we don't have as many parts of ourselves that we need to hide anymore. And I think people feel that when you communicate with them, when you're around someone who's really comfortable with who they are and they're not trying to be someone else. So that's what we focus on with clients. How can they build a relationship with themselves that's truly loving, compassionate, but also they're still pushing themselves? Like a lot of people think, oh, you're being loving and compassionate, but that's just weak and a simp move. But it's really not. It's about you being the biggest ally for yourself, because the only relationship we have for our whole lives is the relationship we have with our mind. So why have that as an abusive relationship, as a
Right.
relationship where we always have to push through? So we build that more loving relationship with our mind, and then as we communicate from that place with the rest of the world, now we can see how impersonal things are, because the default response used to be for me like, hey, if this person is not paying attention, it's because they don't like me. But there can be 100 different reasons why they're not paying attention.
Yep.
So that's to me what it means to be authentic, to build that strong relationship with yourself and getting more and more comfortable expressing parts of yourself that you may think is a bit more controversial, that you might have insecurities around, and then relaxing those insecurities.
Okay. I also wanted to ask,
Yeah.
in terms of in terms of authenticity And let's say, but also like, a lot of guys grow up and they develop, bad dating habits. Like say they're
Yeah.
texting a woman too much or calling all the time or being overly needy with their emotions and feelings. And sometimes in the process of trying to help a guy, like part of that is telling them like, hey, like these are things that these are reasons why these things turn women off, whatever, like that. And sometimes when
Mhm.
I'm telling guys that, the response I get is like, for example, if I'm not texting all the time, that's not me being authentic. So how do you get
Mm.
a guy out of doing bad habits that in the moment, him doing those things are authentic, but aren't helping his cause, while being able to help him see that by building these newer habits, then you'll be authentic, but in a way that's more effective?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think at the beginnings, part of that authenticity is the trust that they put in you as their mentor. So, if a guy is texting too much and he's like, "Yeah, it's authentic to me to write a girl a poem after our first date with 3 pages of just poetry." I'm like, maybe let's not do that. So, I think the difference comes from the calibration, and especially when a guy is building that for himself, this is why it's so good to work with a mentor. Because if you work with a mentor and you have a coach, then the first thing you're doing is, hey, I'm paying this person money because I accept that they know more than me in this area.
Mm,
That's not to say we're better people than them.
right.
We all have our own drawbacks and our own weaknesses and all that. But I think for guys who are like, oh yeah, this is authentic to me, if you're working with someone, hey, you're paying them because they know better than you in this arena. So part of the authenticity is being able to drop the ego
Mm,
and taking in that feedback and going, you know what? I may not understand why this person's telling me, hey, don't text all the time, even if it's authentic. But because they're my mentor, I'm going to follow their advice. And I think there's a lot of experimentation at the beginning. And certain things guys feel like, oh, this is authentic to me. It's not that it's authentic, it's just what they're used to doing.
yeah, true. It was like I said, we learn a lot of bad habits. We get influenced by media to do certain things, and it ends up being like, oh, that isn't actually it's not what women want, and also it's not actually effective for us to get the kind of relationship we want in the first place.
Yeah, like texting a girl all the time, if you're a guy on his mission and you have things to do, even if it's authentic, you're not going to keep that up in 2, 3 months.
Yep.
So it's not really authentic. It's just guys make this like amazing expression at the beginning, and our brain's very good at backwards rationalizing our behavior. So we want to say, like, oh, but it's just authentic to me because
Mm.
it's more difficult to accept. Hey, actually, I'm texting this much because I'm scared that if I don't, she's going to disappear.
Now, you
Yeah.
talked earlier about having self awareness. How can men develop a better self awareness in the dating realm?
Mm.
Whether it's about being able to read the interaction or the reactions women's having to them, or being able to be self analytical about maybe some of the things that they're doing that aren't actually helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, I think when it comes to being self aware, I'm a big proponent that in the moment, just let go. Don't analyze the night as it's happening. Instead, when you go home or the next morning, look back at what happened.
Mm,
So with my clients, I'll tell them, hey, look, let's say you're going to an event or you're going to a bar with the intention of meeting women and being social. In that moment, don't go back into your head. If
mm,
you're having a conversation, just have a conversation. But when you come back, don't go, okay, 2 things I did well in that conversation, and then 2 things I could do better in that conversation, because that puts them back into the analytical mind.
mm,
When it comes to being social, the state you're in is extremely important. So if you're in this playful state, but then you come back and you go back to the analytical state, next conversation you have, you're going to need to step out of the analytical state again,
mm,
rather than if you're just focused on what you're doing, then you can ride that playful state. I'm sure you've had a night where you had one conversation and another conversation, and then 3 hours later, you're like, how did I meet all these people? I don't remember. And we want guys to experience that, but they cannot experience that if they're always reflecting in the moment. So
Right.
what I recommend is have those experiences when you go out, and then the next morning really reflect. Okay, what did I do well tonight or
Mm,
yesterday night? What are two things I could do better for next time? How did I feel during this experience? Having a bigger focus on feeling what they feel, but
right.
also how did people around me feel, which is a very important question.
Mm,
And then asking themselves, was I authentic during this time? And if not, in what ways was I not as authentic as I could be? And then the last question we always have is, what am I going to do differently for next time? So
right.
the focus is always on one thing at a time rather than 20 things to fix on one night. And if it doesn't happen, the world is over.
Right. So they're still being analytical, but it's very focused analyzation at a very
Yeah.
specific time. It's like when you're in the moment, because I know in the moment it's like we're trying to be very logical, but a lot of the stuff in those moments is more about like following your instincts, your emotions, your intuition. And speaking of
Mhm.
that, like how can men that are analytical strike a balance between using their logic and being analytical and being using more of their intuition when it comes to like dating and relationships?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I'd say when it comes to who you pick to date, then it's good to be very analytical and not just think with your brain downstairs and actually look at the woman and look at how she's adding to your life. Because
Mm,
I think in that sense, a lot of men don't pick the relationships they get into. They just settle into relationships with women who they kind of like were friends with, and something happened one night and now they're
mm,
together,
mm. Yeah.
although this may not have been what they wanted to be in. So I think the analysis and the logic comes from creating that higher level perspective for your life and looking at, how am I doing in my health? How am I doing in my career? How am I doing with my overall well being? And almost mapping out this ideal version of you. And then a big part of that is your relationships, and specifically your relationships with women. So that when it comes to the present moment, when you're interacting with women,
Mm,
that's when intuition plays a big role. And a big part of the work we do with clients is helping them step out of their head in that
mm,
present moment and get more into their body. So looking at, what are they tensing up in their body when they're speaking to women? Because
mm,
usually a thought is accompanied by a feeling in the body, like your chest contracts or your shoulders are like very tight. And as guys get to relax that, then whatever relationship they build, it becomes stronger. So it's not that analytical guys don't have a relationship with their intuition,
right.
it's that they haven't consciously built it, because their profession also relies on logic and analysis.
Mm,
If you speak to someone who's a dancer, like who dances salsa or bachata, if you look at like a basketball player, their intuition can be very strong because what they practice for a long time is that fast twitch muscle of like, hey, I cannot overanalyze shooting this three. I'm open now, and then 0.5 seconds later, I'm not going to be. So I
mm,
better shoot it. So it's finding that balance by allowing them to build that muscle stronger, and then using the logic to create that higher level picture for who
mm.
they want to be.
Interesting, interesting. That's so true. Because like even like with your examples, it's like there was a point in time when those people had to be analytical about the stuff, but then they
Mhm.
eventually got over to where they could like do it with intuition, based
Mhm.
on them having the skill set that they built up through years of analyzing this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. At the beginning, there's definitely going to be more analysis within the process. I think even then, though, only this is something very important. Only analyze situations you're actually in.
Mm,
Like, if you are struggling to approach women, there's no point on you watching a video about, how do I juggle three girlfriends all at the same time. You're not there yet, bro. You're not there yet. Approach some woman first.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I got a lot of people watch my videos and they'll comment like, oh yeah, but then these girls do this, and that. It's like, have you ever actually been in that situation? Like,
Yeah, that's a
I
great
don't I don't
question,
talk
bro.
about threesomes 'cause I've never had one. So why would I bring that to the channel? Like I don't
Yeah.
do that kind of thing. But to act like I did or that I know all about it, it's like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the time, like guys in the comments are like, "Hey, Ege, can you make a video about this?" I'm like, "How does this relate to your personal life?" And they're like, "It doesn't. I just think it would be cool." But then that's not very helpful. So when we can reduce our analysis into just what's going on in our lives,
Mhm.
then there's actually not much to analyze. Like if every guy listening to the podcast looks at, okay, what is the one problem I have right now? Is
Mhm.
it I'm not speaking to enough women? Okay, watch a video about that. You watch one or two videos, found someone you resonate with. Okay, now go out and approach. Don't watch a video on how to have a conversation. Don't watch a video on how to go on a date. Don't watch a video on how to get into a relationship
Mhm.
if you're not there yet.
Yeah, it's so true. Last question. For those guys
Mm.
that are analytical, obviously we've talked a lot about how guys get in their heads about things and how they need to kind of like move towards their intuition. But like, what's a positive benefit for somebody that's analytical? In what ways can that be used in a positive way to actually help them towards getting the results they eventually want?
Yeah, I think the common theme with analytical guys is they're very quick and smart with figuring out patterns. So once things click for them, once women start to make sense, then they can become very innovative and they're like, oh, I see it now. It's almost a switch that
Yeah.
clicks at some point where now they're completely self reliant. And I think that's a benefit of being very analytical, but also, most analytical guys are also highly intelligent. That's why they see, okay, this is something I like to fix. And I think the good thing about being analytical is when you do experience that further stages of a relationship, women really love you for it. Like if they have a problem, you have a great solution for it. They love how you think. You can think in ways that's outside the box. And women value intelligence and your ability to fix problems. So I think it's important for men to realize being analytical is not all bad. It just means in earlier parts of the dating process, you might experience a bit more problems, but in later parts, it can also be a strength. And in some situations, it served you very, very well. Like if you're a software engineer, if you weren't analytical, you wouldn't be making that money. You wouldn't be at that company with all these benefits. So I think for men, it's very important to feel gratitude for the cards that they're dealt with instead of trying to be like, oh, I wish I wasn't analytical like this. I wish I was like this person who can just go for it and take action because for all you know, they're struggling in a different part of their lives.
Yep. Like they might be taking action, but in the consequence of that, they're not taking enough time to think about. But like, if I take this
Exactly.
action, what's going to happen? Versus, analytical guys might need to move a little bit faster, but at least they're looking out the pros and cons of stuff.
Yeah, and they can see when they do take action, like, why did this work? Because they're analytical, their mind is used to being like, okay, this worked, but why did it work? And
Hmm.
then once they make that conclusion, they're like, oh, that's why it worked. Oh, I get it now. And then their growth is just exponential.
Excellent. Well, Ege, this has been a great conversation. Please let the people know where they can
Mhm.
find your website, your YouTube channel, all that great stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Yeah, it's been a great conversation. In terms of, I guess, following me on social media, on Facebook, it's Ege Reynolds, Instagram at Real Charming Man, and then our YouTube is The Charming Man. If you want to get in touch, under any YouTube video, there's a link to book a call, or on Facebook or Instagram, you could just send me a message there. Thanks for having me on, bro. It's been a great conversation and I
Hey,
really enjoyed it.
yeah, no problem, man. For the rest of you guys, be sure to check out his YouTube page. He's got some great videos on there as well. And yeah, see if you can sign up for some coaching as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show. For the rest of you guys, we will catch you guys on the next episode. We are out. Peace. You's a bad boy, but you can't stop, won't stop. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high class man. You a high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class.